Well, hello, Veronica. In this segment, I am an American journalist in his early 30s. A journalist who's actually just written a book about technology and technological innovation and the way it impacts contemporary society. And the name of the book is Technology, Good or Evil. And the setting of this speech is actually a book presentation, a presentation of that book to a group of potential customers in a store perhaps, or a bookshop, for instance. And so these people have come over to perhaps buy a book, and it happens that there's this author there talking about technology, and they sit in and listen. And of course, me as an author, I'm hoping I'll be able to sell a few copies of my book. In my presentation, I will be referring to a couple of philosophers. The first is Hartmut Rosa, and the second is Bernard Stiegler. And apart from that, I will also be mentioning a website called Yelp, Y-E-L-P. And when I mention the website, I will explain a little bit what it's about, so don't worry about that. Okay, with that, I think I'll get started. All right, well, thanks to all of you for attending this book presentation. I'm very happy and excited to get a chance to talk about technology and technological information, or innovation rather, in these in contemporary society. Now, I think we'd all agree here that we live in a time where technological change seems to be taking place at an extraordinary pace. But what I'd like to look at is actually the speed at which each individual innovation takes hold. If you think, for example, of the cell phone or the internet, it often takes just a few years for an innovation to grow from a stage where it's something we don't even think we actually want, to a stage where it's something we absolutely need to have. I remember, for instance, that for a few years in the late 90s, I think it was, I made a point of not getting a cell phone, something that today I would imagine a teenager would have a hard time even conceiving of. Now, the fact is that these technologies often make it so much faster and so much easier to do some of the things we do on a daily basis that because of this they become irresistible. And as these technologies become irresistible, they become so widely used that something that didn't even exist a few years before becomes the new norm. It becomes the new normal. Now, the impact of this on society in general is something which has been thoroughly researched by a German philosopher called Hartmut Rosa. And he has written a book called The Acceleration of Time. Now in the book, he looks, amongst other things, at the way we have mastered the instantaneity of information exchange, and the way we've acquired the possibility, for instance, of traveling at speeds that were unimaginable up until very recently. Now, the point is that when he describes these developments, he's not marveling at these innovations, at these advances. Instead of that, what he's doing is he's pointing out that these advances have not translated, for example, into more free time for us. So it's as if there's a disconnect somewhere. On the one hand, we have amazing acceleration of technological innovation and economic exchanges, and on the other, we have this sense that we're no longer making progress in a more meaningful manner as a culture, as a society, in terms of happiness and well-being. Now, I think you don't have to be a philosopher to share his view that although technological innovations over the past years and decades have been breathtaking and allow us to do today things that we couldn't have dreamed of in the past, that despite that, they haven't necessarily made us a more relaxed or a happier people. So this seems to be somewhat paradoxical. Progress from a technological standpoint, but a standstill at the best in other fields. Now, in order to make sense of this seemingly paradoxical situation, it can be helpful to pay attention to what another philosopher has to say about the topic. Bernard Stiegler, who is French, basically argues that we need to take a pharmacological approach to new technologies. Now, what he means by that is that when we consider a new pharmacological product, typically a drug, we realize that we need to look at least two things. Of course, we want to see, first of all, if the new drug does indeed have a positive effect on the illness or condition it's supposed to address. But equally important, we also understand that any drug is going to have side effects, right? And these side effects need to be properly assessed. So what we're saying here is that the essence of a drug, of a pharmacological product, is that it has multiple effects. Some are good, some are bad, but all of these need to be evaluated. Now, Stiegler says that the same goes for technology. His focus, actually, in his case, is on the way technology can have an impact on the way we experience desire. But don't worry, I'm not planning on branching off and discussing that part of his work. My point here is simply to say that when we realize that by definition, technological innovations are always two-sided, well, when we realize that, that helps us make sense, in a way, of the situation we're in today. Now, I'd like to illustrate this with an article I read recently in the local paper where I live, which is Washington, and so this is an article from the Washington Post. And the story starts by describing how absolutely furious this lady in the US was with the company that she had hired to do some repair work on her house. Now, according to this woman, the contractor had just had done damage to her house. He had billed her for work that he hadn't done, and he'd even stolen some of her jewelry. Now, she didn't like this at all, obviously, and as a result, she did something that is now quite common in this internet age. She logged onto Yelp, which is a website, and posted very negative reviews about the firm that had done the job. Now, I don't know if Yelp exists over here, so just so you know, it's one of those sites that lists all sorts of businesses, including restaurants, shops, real estate agents, etc. And it lists all these businesses, but it lets customers give feedback on their experience. Now, obviously, people thinking about going out for dinner or who are looking for a real estate agent or whatever will often check these sites to see what other people think. Now, as I explained, this is all quite normal in this day and age. That wasn't really the point of the article. What was surprising is that the contractor decided to actually sue the lady for the negative reviews that she had posted online about him. He argued that her postings were false and that they had sent customers fleeing, and he's actually asking for $750,000. And in fact, although the figures are probably not exactly the same, I understand that such situations may be emerging in Europe too. Now, there are many aspects of this story which I find really interesting and that we should probably talk about in Q&A, but to me, what is really riveting about this article has to do with the fact that, in fact, every single day there are sites being set up, websites, I mean, where millions of businesses are being discussed by hundreds of millions of people. And so the pace at which we exchange information is unbelievable. The pace at which we innovate is unbelievable. And at the same time, this information that we exchange, the way we exchange it, will have a huge real-life impact, both good and bad. And so in a way, I'm tempted to think that what defines the era we live in is that it's virtually impossible as individuals or as philosophers or even as a society to really think through the tremendous repercussions of technological change which is taking place at a speed and at a scope which is truly unprecedented. Thank you very much.